It is February 1943. The German Sixth Army, once 300,000 strong, is encircled and dying inside Stalingrad. Ammunition is low. Rations are gone. Starvation and disease gnaw at the survivors. Every street corner has been fought for, every room taken and lost again. General Friedrich Paulus, the man who led the most powerful army on earth into the Soviet Union, now sits in a basement listening to the rumble of Soviet artillery inching closer. Above ground, the Red Army launches its final assault. Soviet soldiers dash across open ground, supported by T-34 tanks and Katyusha rockets. The thunder shakes the frozen city. This is not just a battle for a city. This is the turning point of a world war, the bloodiest battle in human history. In the summer of 1942, Hitler's Wehrmacht had swept deep into the Soviet Union. The blitzkrieg that stunned Europe was now rolling across the steppes, devouring entire Soviet armies. Germany's plan for that year, Operation Blue, aimed to seize the oil fields of the Caucasus and cut off the Volga River, the Soviet Union's lifeline of transport and supply. At the heart of this plan lay a city on the western bank of the Volga, Stalingrad. Stalingrad was not just a name on a map. It was a symbol. The city bore Stalin's own name, making it a political prize for Hitler. Its factories produced tanks and weapons that fueled the Soviet war effort. Its position on the Volga made it a key link between the north and south of the Soviet Union. If Stalingrad fell, German forces could choke off supplies and threaten Moscow from the rear. If it held, it could bleed the Wehrmacht dry. Hitler, obsessed with prestige, saw Stalingrad as a personal challenge to Stalin. He believed that capturing the city would shatter Soviet morale and cement his victory in the east. Stalin, equally stubborn, ordered that the city must be held at all costs. Not a step back. His order number 227 declared. The result was inevitable. A battle fought to annihilation. By late summer 1942, two titanic forces converged on the banks of the Volga. On one side, the German Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, reinforced by the 4th Panzer Army under Hermann Hoth. On the other, the Soviet 62nd and 64th Armies under Generals Vasily Chukov and Mikhail Shumilov, directed by Marshal Georgy Zhukov from Moscow. Between them lay a sprawling city of 400,000 civilians, factories, rail yards, oil tanks, and miles of working-class neighborhoods, soon to become a nightmare battlefield. The German Sixth Army entered the Stalingrad region in late August 1942. It was the spearhead of Army Group B, over 250,000 men strong, supported by thousands of artillery pieces, tanks, and the Luftwaffe's 4th Air Fleet. These soldiers were veterans of Poland, France, and the initial stages of Operation Barbarossa. They were confident, well-armed, and accustomed to victory. The Luftwaffe prepared the way. On August 23rd, waves of German bombers descended on Stalingrad, dropping over 1,000 tons of explosives. The city erupted into an inferno. Wooden houses vanished. Concrete buildings cracked and collapsed. Oil tanks ignited, sending black smoke into the sky. By nightfall, tens of thousands of civilians were dead. Yet the ruins the Germans created would become their worst enemy. Every shattered wall, every cellar, every pile of rubble became a fortress for Soviet defenders. On the Soviet side, General Vasily Chukov took command of the 62nd Army just as the battle began. He was a blunt, no-nonsense officer with a talent for improvisation. His orders were simple: hold Stalingrad or die in it. He turned the city into a maze of kill zones. Snipers roamed freely, picking off German officers. Mortars were hidden in basements. Anti-tank rifles waited at street corners. Soviet troops crossed the Volga under constant artillery fire, ferried by brave sailors of the Volga flotilla. The terrain itself magnified the horror. Stalingrad stretched for 30 miles along the Volga but was only a few miles wide. It was an urban battlefield of factories, rail lines, and working-class districts, the kind of terrain that nullified German advantages in maneuver warfare. Tanks could not easily navigate the rubble. Artillery was less effective at clearing defenders hidden in basements and sewers. The Wehrmacht was used to sweeping advances across open ground. Here, they found themselves in a slugging match for every building, every stairwell. Weapons defined the fighting. The Germans relied on the MG-34 machine gun, mortars, and Stuka dive bombers. The Soviets, lacking heavy equipment at first, compensated with ingenuity. They deployed the PPSH-41 submachine gun for brutal close-quarters fighting, and their feared T-34 tanks lurked in ambush near the tractor factory. The famous Katyusha rocket launchers provided terrifying barrages. Even knives, grenades, and shovels became weapons in the deadly game of room-to-room combat. When the Sixth Army first reached Stalingrad, its commanders believed the city would fall quickly. After all, the Luftwaffe had reduced much of it to rubble, and the Soviets were retreating across the Volga. On September 13th, Paulus launched his main assault. 3 Army Corps attacked the city from the north and south, supported by tanks and Stukas. The Germans expected to roll through, but instead of a rout, they encountered a nightmare. The Soviet 62nd Army, clinging to a narrow strip of land along the river, refused to yield. Zhukov ordered his troops to fight hugging the Germans, engaging them at such close range that the Luftwaffe and artillery could not safely fire without hitting their own men. This tactic neutralized German firepower and turned the battle into a series of brutal small-unit engagements. Landmarks became death traps. The Mamiev Kurgan, a strategic hill overlooking the city, changed hands multiple times in a single day. The railway station number 1, the grain elevator, and the Red October factory, all names etched in blood, were defended to the last man. Soviet snipers like Vasily Zaitsev turned the ruins into a hunting ground, sowing fear among German troops. Each block became a miniature Verdun, costing hundreds of lives. By October, the Germans controlled most of Stalingrad's western districts. The Soviets held only small pockets near the river. Yet the more ground the Germans took, the more exhausted they became. Supplies had to cross miles of shattered roads under constant shellfire. Reinforcements were thin. Winter was approaching. Zhukov, meanwhile, received a steady trickle of reinforcements across the Volga at night. Soviet factories, some still operating in the city itself, produced weapons almost within sight of the front lines. The 62nd Army dug in deeper, fortifying basements, sewers, and factory floors. They launched sudden counterattacks to keep the Germans off balance. The battle devolved into what both sides called Rattenkrieg, rat war. Soldiers fought with grenades, pistols, and bayonets in stairwells and crawl spaces. Hand-to-hand combat was routine. The smell of cordite, blood, and burning oil permeated everything. Civilians who survived the initial bombing still cowered in cellars, enduring hunger and cold alongside the soldiers. At this point, the battle seemed like a slow-motion German victory. But far away, in Moscow, Stalin and his generals were preparing a counterstroke that would change everything. While the Germans bled themselves dry in the ruins, far behind the front, Marshal Georgy Zhukov and General Alexander Vasilevsky planned a massive counteroffensive. They knew the Sixth Army's flanks were held not by veteran Germans but by overstretched Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian divisions. These troops lacked anti-tank weapons and were deployed across open steppes with little cover. If struck hard, the entire German position at Stalingrad could collapse. On November 19, 1942, under a blinding snowstorm, the Red Army struck. Over 1 million Soviet soldiers surged forward north and south of Stalingrad. T-34 tanks smashed into Romanian positions like hammers breaking glass. Artillery thundered for hours. Katyusha rockets shrieked through the air. The Axis flanks buckled almost immediately. In just 4 days, Soviet spearheads linked up near the town of Kalik, more than 50 miles west of Stalingrad. The German Sixth Army was encircled. Inside the city, Paulus at first could not believe it. He expected Hitler to authorize a breakout, but Hitler forbade retreat. "The Sixth Army will stand fast," he radioed. Hermann Göring boasted that the Luftwaffe could supply the army by air, an impossible promise in the brutal Russian winter. The trap snapped shut. The hunters had become the hunted. As December's icy winds swept over the steppe, 250,000 Axis troops were trapped in what they called the Kessel, the cauldron. Food rations dwindled to a few ounces of bread and horse meat per day. Frostbite blackened fingers and toes. Ammunition ran out. The dead lay frozen in the snow where they fell. Soviet artillery and snipers tightened the noose daily. Yet still Hitler ordered them to fight. A relief attempt, Operation Winterstorm, was launched by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, but it stalled short of the pocket in mid-December. Paulus was forbidden to break out to meet it. The Sixth Army was doomed. Inside Stalingrad, fighting continued in a strange, frozen twilight. German soldiers who had once stormed across Europe now scavenged for food in basements. Soviet propaganda loudspeakers blared across the lines, urging surrender. Some Axis units, Italians, Romanians, melted away or gave up. But many Germans fought on grimly, believing their only hope was to hold out until spring. On January 10, 1943, the Soviets launched their final offensive, Operation Ring. Thousands of guns opened up in one of the largest artillery barrages of the war. Soviet troops advanced methodically, crushing one pocket of resistance after another. The cauldron shrank daily. Paulus, now promoted to Field Marshal, the highest rank in the German army, knew that no German field marshal had ever been taken prisoner. Hitler expected him to commit suicide rather than surrender. Paulus refused. On January 31, 1943, Soviet troops captured his headquarters in the basement of a department store. The commander of the once mighty Sixth Army surrendered. 2 days later, on February 2nd, the last German forces in the northern pocket laid down their arms. The battle for Stalingrad was over. The scale of the slaughter defies comprehension. Estimates vary, but historians agree that between August 1942 and February 1943, roughly 2 million people were killed, wounded, or captured, soldiers and civilians alike. The German Sixth Army ceased to exist. Over 90,000 prisoners marched into Soviet captivity. Only a few thousand would ever return to Germany. For the Soviets, Stalingrad was both a victory and a tragedy. Entire divisions were annihilated. The city itself was reduced to rubble. Yet it marked the first time Hitler's grand offensive had been decisively defeated. It shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility and shifted the strategic initiative to the Red Army for the rest of the war. Politically, the repercussions were global. Germany's allies on the Eastern Front, Romania, Hungary, Italy, lost faith and began looking for ways out of the war. In the West, Allied morale soared. Roosevelt and Churchill hailed Stalingrad as a heroic stand. Stalin became the face of Soviet resistance, strengthening his hand at upcoming conferences with the Allies. Militarily, the consequences were catastrophic for Germany. From Stalingrad onward, the Wehrmacht would never again launch a major offensive in the East without first recovering from defeat. The Red Army, bolstered by its victory, began a relentless drive westward that would end in Berlin. Why is Stalingrad remembered as the bloodiest battle in history? Because it combined everything. A symbolically vital city, massive armies, urban combat on an apocalyptic scale, starvation, encirclement, and total annihilation. It was not just a fight for terrain. It was a duel of wills between two dictators and two ideologies. The battle also rewrote the doctrine of war. It showed how industrialized nations could fight and die inside cities built for civilians. It demonstrated that air power and armor, so effective in open terrain, could be nullified by rubble and determination. It taught the Soviets and the world that the Wehrmacht could be beaten. Even today, the name Stalingrad resonates. In Russia, the rebuilt city of Volgograd stands as a living memorial. On Mamiev Kurgan, the giant statue the motherland calls towers over the graves of tens of thousands. In Germany, the loss remains a national trauma. For military historians, Stalingrad is a case study in hubris, logistics, and the limits of command. Picture the scene once more. February 1943. Snow swirling through ruins. Silence falling over a battlefield where millions once fought. The Volga flows again, ice breaking, carrying the memory of the dead. The city that bore Stalin's name has survived, but at a cost almost beyond imagining. Stalingrad was not just a turning point in a war. It was a turning point in human history, a reminder of what happens when ambition, ideology, and total war converge on a single place. Its lessons still echo in every modern conflict fought in cities, from Grozny to Aleppo. If you found this story compelling, subscribe to the channel and join us for more deep dives into the battles that shaped our world. In our next episode, we'll explore another clash where hubris met its match.